On this week's show, discussing modeling language with Hugh Seaton from The Link. In this week's news, rules, inflation cools, virtual desktops, and more. All right, I'm here with Nathan Wood. He is sporting the hot flamingo shirt if you're watching it on YouTube, which you should be, because you should be checking us out on YouTube. And he came up with that cool title, which of course makes no sense to nobody. Modeling language, modeling clothing. What's up, Nathan Wood?
It's hot down here, so I figured I'd wear a hot shirt. I'm rocking the flamingos, so I'm excited to dig in with you.
Did they take out the HVAC out of there now, part of the construction, or what?
Oh no, basement's real cool. It's nice and cool down here. It's a little bit of a challenge to get back upstairs. That's the only problem.
Yeah, we can talk about that one later at some point, Hugh. But he's messing up my room down there. But eventually, it'll be redone for me, right, Nathan?
Oh yeah. We'll have it all. I mean, it is still technically livable. You just have to wear your work boots to get down the stairs.
Hey, he's living construction and talking about living construction and living technology. Hugh Seaton, coming from a nice, cool Austin today, huh?
That's right. I think we're only going to be 103 degrees. So I don't know what I'm going to do with myself.
And it's going to only feel like 110 with the humidity, right?
That's right. Well, it's not a dry heat, but it's not a humid heat either. It's just right.
Right in the middle where I hate it. And we could dive into Nathan trying to make me run there and make me feel so horrible. I almost had heat stroke, and that was like a month ago. So yeah. I can't even imagine running there right now. We're going to dive in more with both of you. We're going to get back to this. But before we do, we got to pause for the cause.
Whenever you're talking about something as substantial as suicide awareness and as alarming as to statistics around construction being the second highest rates of suicide in industry, we'd be fooling ourselves if we thought that this was a one-player fix, meaning that it just takes one silver bullet or one easy button to solve this challenge. This is a multi-threaded challenge, if you will, and it's really something that is the responsibility of all of us to lean in, to raise awareness, to provide tools and resources, to up-level conversations we have around, in construction, we're pretty much, hey, what's my job require me to get it done at any cost? Well, we now see what the outcome of that is. So I think it's important that we partner together to really have a unified voice around why mental health awareness is important, why it matters, and how we can frankly do better as an industry. It takes each of us leaning in to really create that.
All right. I said it once already. I'll say it again. We're back on YouTube. Check out youtube.com. You might even get on the show if I see you subscribe and it gets there. We had a couple of new ones this week, so thank you for going over there and hitting the subscribe button. Our shorts are coming out. You get up on everything that comes out, and you can check out Nathan's cool shirt. At the ConTech crew, we focus on technology that solves industry problems, and we've always believed in our sponsors. So much so that I went to work for one of them. So today, I want to talk to you about Join. Every construction project is a unique prototype, and it's actually shaped by thousands of decisions that impact the owner's business case, design, and the budget. Today, the communication driving these decisions is disjointed across all the stakeholders. Work happens in email, Excel, estimating, resulting in delays, waiting for decisions, waiting for access to information, and sometimes that information is outdated and incomplete. Managing the expectations of the team and keeping the project moving forward is a constant challenge, and a lot of times drives skepticism amongst the contributors. Join empowers general contractors to build with confidence and maximize the potential of every project by connecting these owners through new workflows that fit into your existing processes. We bring design teams and trade partners into a single platform. There's transparency and collaboration in the decision-making, which builds trusts and sets projects up for success. You might be asking yourself, do you need another tool? Well, let me tell you, Join fits in seamlessly with your processes and your other tools. In fact, we're here to help those other tools. Regardless of your estimating system or your project management process, Join will be a valuable added resource without disrupting those other systems and your teams. So listen, put your spreadsheets on ice and leave your email behind for the decision-making platform for the built environment. Learn more at join.build. All right, we're back. Hugh Seaton, CEO of The Link. Tell us a little bit about The Link and kind of what you're doing there. You've had a progression through some things that we can pull a golden thread. We'll go in reverse. Tell us a little bit about what The Link is and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, so I spent some time with the Construction Specifications Institute. Love that place. Went there, in fact, because I had a feeling I might find a big problem to solve, and we did. So, specs were grown in a time when everything was paper, like half of the industry was. And it's not the easiest thing to navigate, especially when people need an answer quickly. We kind of make the analogy of maps. In the past, nobody used a real map unless they were going really far. And it's kind of like specs right now. You use them when you've got a big problem and it's worth the effort. Well, for us, what we're doing is kind of making that leap from a paper map to Google Maps with specs to say, I want a superintendent, I want anyone on the project to be able to just check because they're not sure. It's so frictionless and so easy. They can say, I think I'm right, but let me just double check. And so you imagine, someone who's been pouring concrete for 25 years, but then gets asked to help in a job in California where the rules I hear are a little different. So we've actually got some friends that are lawyers out there, and they'll tell you that happens over and over again, is that one or two lines in the spec that should have been easy to check, but who wants to go through 400 pages of that, just the concrete spec sections, to find one little thing. So what we're looking to do is make specs consumable and, for everybody. The owner ought to be able to go and check something just by asking. They ought to be able to reference that against standards. We're talking a little about OSHA, I think a little bit later, that you should be able to tell whether we're referencing OSHA or not. And there's a ton of other documents that all feed into and are referenced by specs. And all that should be easy to answer quickly and when you need it, just like Google Maps are.
Yeah, just right at your fingertips. And I think we're seeing this consistently right now in the industry, that so much stuff is buried and so much risk is buried in the documentation and buried in the fine print and buried in different areas. And the modern innovations are allowing us to unleash some of that and to comb through it faster and focus where it doesn't get rid of the risk, but it focuses us on the risk and focuses us on the task at hand. So you're at The Link, you guys are working on the spec side of things, but that came from your time at CSI.
Yeah. And
before that, some people might know you even wrote a book.
I did write a book, the Construction Technology Handbook. I'll tell you, it was an absolute labor of love, but also a really easy way to meet some of the coolest people in the industry, both of you included, as I recall. That got me going. I started my own little podcast also to just hear from people. There's better than anyone else. There's a lot of smart people that are coming up with good ideas, trying out bad ideas, but learning from them. There's a lot of stuff going on in this industry, and that kind of led me to the book and other things.
Yeah, it was cool because I actually remember when you called me for that book. Like, we hadn't really met, we connected, called me. I was sitting in a friend's house, and you're like, I was like, how long do we have? You asked the question, and I think by the end you were like, all right, shut up. This was enough. So, because it was just burgeoning at that point, and I never thought about it. Doing the research for the book was kind of a window into what was going on and gave you a path to meet a bunch of people too.
Yeah, that's right.
I distinctly remember my meeting with Hugh because this was definitely pre-pandemic. And Hugh, we got on our Zoom meeting and you were, camera on, ready to go, face. And that was a very, at the time, kind of taboo, awkward thing. Like, nobody in our industry ever turned cameras on, let alone use Zoom. It was like, maybe go-to meeting. And so I remember kind of almost feeling awkward at the time. And then that was like right before the pandemic. And then all of a sudden everybody started turning cameras on, and that whole kind of social shift changed. And so it's crazy to me to think, how long ago, but also how recently those interviews were, but also, how profound that book has been is really to synthesize and articulate what Jeff and I and others say, over and over and over again, and get better as we practice. But it's hard to really refine that down. So kudos on putting that book out. I know how hard that is to do.
It was a lot of fun, and as I say, I got to meet folks like you and dozens of others. So good stuff.
So I'm interested because obviously in that you heard from a lot of us and a lot of folks on the struggles, right? I mean, geez, at that point, I know when we were talking about simple digitization, not even, digitalization, not even moving into the future. And that's not that long ago. And fast forward to what you're doing today and what we're seeing with, chat GPT and AI. What makes you think the industry, given your history, brief history in that book, what makes you think they're ready?
That's a great question. I think the book itself, I quickly got to a place where I was like, you know what I'm not going to do? Write some majestic academic thing about some future of construction 6.0 and so on. I actually wound up defining a bunch of terms. And I do that a lot. And you guys do that a lot. Half of what you're doing is saying, I spent a lot of time with, cloud engineers or whoever it is, and they talk a language that's hard for someone actually doing a job to understand. There's nothing unique about construction there. If you talk to an accountant, you quickly know that you're going over their head when you get past a certain point. I think the same thing is true with AI, especially this new wave of language models. There's a lot of people talking about it that haven't really done much with it, which I don't think helps. Ultimately, what we're seeing is, especially again, the new wave, they're bridging that gap in a way that no technology I've ever seen before has. I'll give you an easy example. We're doing some training, which is what you do with AI. It's kind of the law. And I'm talking to one of our engineers and I'm like, hey, I don't know how I'm going to get 1,000 questions to ask it. He said, well, tell it to write 1,000 questions and knock out the ones that are stupid. Like, that's insane. There's no software ever where you could have said, hey, I'm about to go train you. Can you give me some ideas? And that's a reasonable thing to do with the ChatGPT like bit of software. So I think the point is everything from how people get trained to their ability to check on something, all is really different from where it was just 6 months ago. Like a PE can ask a question right now. And if it's a basic question about, I don't know, what, some rule or something like that, if it's out in the public domain, you can get a reasonable answer just from the publicly available ChatGPT. I would suggest you ask it to make sure it's right, which it'll often do, but you get a good answer in a way that just wasn't true before.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge there, right? Is it the right answer, and where does that right answer come from, Nathan?
Yeah, well, that's exactly where I was going to go with this. I wrote down availability of data and reliability of data. And I think, Hugh, that's where I've always been fascinated, because you do come from outside industries and kind of seeing this, higher worldview of how things work. And I feel like so many of those success stories that we're looking to model after, that when you look at availability of data, ChatGPT and others, and reliability of that data, just as you described, like those are two components that I think we're kind of failing in both. Like, we don't make the data available, and it's the data we do make available probably isn't very reliable either. Or are you finding otherwise? Are you finding pockets where there is reliable data?
I think, like anything, there's going to be a yes and a no. So I think it depends a little bit on what kind of data you're talking about, point one. The other thing is they're able to read text. That wasn't true before. So deep learning, you need to have rows and lines of tagged data and really prep it. A large language model can read the text, so you can give it unstructured and semi-structured data. So that's kind of point one. Some of the data prep problems in the past are less true. The garbage in, garbage out thing is true if you go to a human. If I teach you bad things, you're going to spit out bad things. So I think the second part of your question is, you can't just dump a terabyte of documents in and hope it goes well. I think there's things that need to be done that are a little different from what we're used to with deep learning, in that you need to somehow indicate to the model what this stuff means and what's important, because it'll just grab things. The other thing, though, Nathan, and this is true of any software, anything that is using math, you need to ask yourself how accurate this needs to be. Like, that's the first question of all AI, whether it's deep learning or large language models. And if your answer is around 80%, you're in luck, because a lot of things get to 80% kind of quickly. But it speaks to the fact that I know you guys have been, the drum you've been beating in various ways for a while, is technology doesn't replace anyone. It augments you. It might mean you need fewer people, but right now that's not a bad thing, because there's just not enough folks who've got retirement, all this. So I think humans are going to be in the loop no matter what. Like, we're nowhere near, almost any AI that I've ever seen is ready to be left alone. The exception is maybe Google with their search, right? But that's like really weird because of who they are. So what you're getting is something that would be like a really, really intelligent but narrow assistant who can't make decisions for you, but can help serve up information that your judgment and experience then says, great, I'm going to take this and either ignore it or I'm going to do something with it, which still cuts out. We talked before a little bit about, well, we didn't really, but, cutting out inefficiency of paperwork and admin. Like the degree to which that can really help us, I think is just enormous. And that's where you're going to see it. I think when people try to make them do too much, like, write specs from scratch, there's no spec-o-matic button, even now.
Spec-o-matic. I love that.
I like that. Yeah.
Shout out to Paul Doherty.
Yeah. Paul Doherty. Okay. I love that. Good shout to Paul. I want to take you a step back. You said you can now feed it unstructured and semi-structured data versus structured data from before. Give people driving down the road who may not understand that. Give a few examples quick of what each one is so they can understand the progression. Because I think that's a critical piece in the data.
But actually, even before that, you said it is a language model, right?
Yeah,
like what is a language model? And then, like, how do you feed it different types of data?
Yeah, let's talk about kind of the waves of AI. So AI has been around as an idea since the mid-'60s. It hasn't worked since the mid-'60s, but the idea came up then. And some pretty smart folks said, we're going to go to a summer camp, literally, in New Hampshire. We think we'll solve this over the summer. It's a really funny story. They didn't. In the 80s, we had expert systems, and expert systems were when you first started to hear about useful AI, and that was basically a bunch of rules. The problem is you can't write enough rules to recognize a face, unless it's like mine, where it's a face for radio, but otherwise not so much. That kind of ran out of gas, and then around 2013, we had the next round, which was deep learning. And deep learning it's not important how, but they used a bunch of math where they would take thousands and millions of examples of something and teach a system to recognize that. And that's where you've got really structured data. You can think of it as like 1,000 pictures of cats and a label that says cat, 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 and then other pictures of dogs that say dog, 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 dog. And you run that through a system and train it to be able to recognize a dog versus a cat. And in fact, the first time this really came out was, as I say, at Stanford University, there was a competition about dog breeds. And there was a total step change. It was 20% better than anything else. That's structured data. And the AI that we've been used to for the last decade or so really needed things to be in rows and columns to work. And that's where you spent a lot of time prepping data and making sure that the decimals were right. And there's just a lot that you needed to get right, because it's not that different. If you're in Excel and you import a bunch of numbers, and some of them are formatted as like number and some of them are formatted as like general and some are text, and then you try to say sum this column, it won't, because the data is formatted differently, even though it looks the same. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it drives me nuts when I'm pulling in data that does that all the time. Well, that's some of what the Nathan was referring to before is the construction, most industries, but the construction industry has not gone through and make sure that all their data is in the same format so you can do math against it. That's super expensive. And, there's a whole thing. Do we start doing it now and then our old data doesn't match with our new data? It's like the classic conundrum of when do we just bite the bullet and change? And you're seeing people do that. So that's sort of structured data. Semi-structured data is something like, text that is in paragraphs or in kind of in a format that you understand. Specifications can be like that because there's a standard way that you write them, the CSI page format. Unstructured is this conversation. So if you were to take the transcript from this and try to do something with it, it's not structured. It's just us talking. Right now, these large language models are able to do something with that. And to get back to finalizing the question, deep learning it's basically a lot of math that can recognize and predict things. When you take water from 33 degrees and make it, 31 degrees, it changes. Sometimes more is different. And that's what happened here is there's some algorithms that they changed, specifically a thing called a transformer, but also just an insane amount of data. They trained these new models that can now do things that are really different. They don't just kind of predict whether that's a dog or not. They predict what you might say next so well that they can write. It's really weird. I don't think they knew this would happen, but it can actually write for you. So you're seeing with ChatGPT, you say, hey, write me a 400-word essay on the Construction Progress Coalition. And it'll be able to do that. Nathan might not like it, but it'll be able to do that. That was never true before. The ability to generate things based on having seen the whole internet is really new. And what that does is it allows it to understand things with way more context than any other thing could do. Often better than a human, and often it misses crazy things that a human would never miss. I mean, it's a funny blend of absolute crazy excellence and really surprising stupidity.
But I think herein lies the difference between the public domain of, like a CPC, you can scrape CPC's website and get all that information and I probably wouldn't like it because I don't like what's on the website anyway. But that's how things work in iterations. But I think, at the end of the day, the private stuff is what's challenging, right? Like you want to find information that you find out you actually don't have access to, even though in theory, maybe you should, and kind of breaking down some of those barriers is really, I think, a lot of what the link is trying to do, right? Is kind of break down some of those different cross-party barriers and make it easier to share what data that was maybe private and just taking parts of it and sharing it with other companies.
That's exactly right.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think so. It's worth keeping in mind. In October of 2022, none of this conversation was happening, right? So 8 months ago, this wasn't a thing. Everybody, well, not everybody, lots of people knew about GPT-3, and it was like, wow, that's so cool, but it's unsteerable. We looked at it seriously, and it wasn't something you could do anything with. The guys at OpenAI, the men and women at OpenAI, created a new way of training called reinforcement learning with human input, I believe. But the point is they trained it to work for humans and not just spit out everything it thought, which is, there's a metaphor in there somewhere. But what it does is it'll be able to look at what's going on out in the internet. But the bigger point to what you were saying is, as this is moving, almost every week something new is happening, right? And we all know about ChatGPT, but there's also, Stanford University very quickly came up with another thing. I believe they call it Llama. So did Meta, because they've got incredible talent there. The point is, it's moving so fast. Like nothing else have we been paying attention this much to something this early in the game. You know what I mean? So everything we think is true right now, every limitation may or may not get solved. So the hallucination thing that we've kind of implied, where it'll make stuff up if it doesn't know the answer, it's already dramatically better than it was. The other thing, though, Nathan, to your point about private information, a guy came up with a thing called LangChain, which is a framework that allows you to plug a large language. It doesn't have to be OpenAI. It can be any one of them. Again, Stanford has one, Anthropic has one. There's a bunch of them out there. You can plug that in and then connect it to other tools that allow you to pull in way more documents than the LLM can handle on its own, because they've only got an input that's about 10 pages. It depends on which one it is, but 10 to 50 pages. Well, a lot of times you want 1,000 pages. So they've got ways of pre-processing, and this is a lot of what we're doing at the link right now, is how do you pre-process with construction intelligence and not just keywords or rhymes and so on. And that's really cool. That's where you can sort of begin to codify some of the knowledge that's out there, so that a young PM can do some of the things an older, more experienced PM might. There's a limit to that, right? You're not teaching anyone intuition, but at least it'll be better at searching for things that matter. So that's sort of where we are now. There are tools out there that are growing all the time that allow you with less and less effort to be able to connect this pretty powerful engine to what you want. But we come back to the fact that no one should trust this stuff on its own. No AI I've ever met is, again, except for Google. But, Google doesn't have to be that accurate. It has to, somebody once said, I'm okay with Amazon search being 60, 70% accurate because it doesn't really hurt if it's wrong. When you're actually asking someone to do their job, you need to be better than that. But everyone needs to be clear that it's not replacing a human's judgment and experience. It's augmenting it as if you had a paralegal. I mean, that's maybe an interesting way of thinking about it, is construction PMs and superintendents will now have a paralegal to help them do research and go find stuff for them. But ultimately, the lawyer does the decision making.
Yeah, and I think that's the nuance of what I've been trying to focus on in the conversation itself, is that there is this idea that, a lot of businesses are going to be put out of business doing this. And it's like, well, if some of this stuff was at the core of what you do and specific to our industry, sure, it's probably not a good place to be right now, but because it's going to be table stakes in a lot of areas. But the real power is with companies like Link and others that harness it to weed the stupidity out and and get to the information needed to make better decisions in the long term and actually connect the private data and the public data, right? The private data has its power around what you do and what you know and what you've experienced. That some of that you might not want to share. We could get into the nuances of how much data we should share and what we shouldn't share. That would be a whole nother show. But you're talking about using this to weed, I'd call it the stupidity out in the answer, and then provide a set of superpowers to those people to keep things moving forward, right? So you said the paralegal assistant, and this is where I'll agree with the people who say, certain people will be out of jobs. If your job was typing and searching, sure, you're probably out of a job. I just think the future worker, that PE, PM, even PE or project executive, those people who understand how to use this virtual assistant that's immensely knowledgeable are the ones who are going to level up. They'll be those new knowledge workers, right?
Absolutely right. I would also say if we were in a time where we had too many workers and we were worried about it, there'd be a point to make. But actually, I think it's the opposite, right? Is that construction's had a labor shortage for as long as anyone can remember. But if you think about the demographics of the U.S., there's no reason to think it's ever going away. And
I'll challenge. Actually, I got asked that I made that statement, and somebody said, "Whoa! I actually disagree with you." And it was the first time I ever thought about this. We don't necessarily have completely a shortage. We have a shortage of skilled workers, skilled people that can perform. Like, we can actually get more folks, but we can't train them, we can't teach them, and we can't use them because of where we are. So I think that plays to exactly what you're saying is we have a gap, and part of it, the technology will shrink the gap, and part of it, the technology will empower the worker to come and meet that gap and train and codify the knowledge into the systems themselves to help people be more powerful, right? And be more experienced without actually having experienced it themselves.
I 100% agree. And again, it's making better use of the people you do have. So if you've got someone with 25 years of experience as an electrician, it'd be nice if they weren't spending a quarter of their time on paperwork. And it's a very document heavy industry, and with reason. It's not, you're talking about something that takes 2 years to build. So there's lots of controls and lots of paper and lots of whatever. But, how do we make it so that electrician or that tradesman or the GC, who also brings an awful lot of experience that is better spent thinking about the job and about what's going on than worrying about, simple paperwork. So whatever we can do to limit that. But also the interesting thing here is because you now have the ability to understand, and by that I mean the large language models can actually understand a bit of what they're seeing. I think we will get to a place where you also get it checking things for you. Again, it's not going to be as good as someone with 25 years of experience, but if it can quickly catch things, and just limit the amount of time that person has to spend, that alone is huge.
I think to your point, Hugh, that this whole paradigm shift of the way that you approach problems is fundamentally different. And I think so much of what we've done in construction is really delivered information down and trained very prescriptively of this is how you get this thing done, as opposed to, hey, here's this thing that needs to be done and why it needs to be done. You tell us how to get it done, and almost put it back into the hands of the younger generation that have all these tools in front of them. I think a lot of that's the teaching moment there is how do we set up these scenarios that are less, I'm going to tell you how to do it and you go do it and write these 1,000 questions versus more, here's the outcome that we need and you figure out the most innovative way to get there.
Yeah. And, there's a legal side and a risk side to what you just said. And I think the way we look at risk, and unfortunately a lot of the way risk is operationalized is what claims have been settled and what lawyers are out there that can actually defend a thing. So I think one of the things that'll slow some of the freedom you just talked about is this idea of how are we managing risk, which is it's an absolutely valid point, and I totally see that happening. That you'll open up problem solving in a way that wasn't true before, when everything had to be documented because everything was paper, and now you don't need to document quite the same because you can audit what people did digitally. The degree to which that will reflect itself, I think it absolutely will happen. We're just going to have to think about how to defend that legally. And it's a little bit incumbent on software providers to create that audit trail and to record what's going on. And I think you'll start to see that. I'm hearing it more and more is that people think about, how is my software creating a new standard of care? And if so, how am I making sure I'm not creating new risks? You know what I mean? And that's a big one. And I think between documentation and the things you choose to save and the things you choose to allow to be permanently deleted, you can really think about how you're changing or maintaining or reducing the risk profile of your customer. It's not easy. It's like anything else. It takes a lot of work.
It takes a lot of work, a lot of care, but this is the interesting part too, because if you listen back in the shows, we had Rose Hall on, and I had her on stage at the AGC National Convention this year with Rick Kahn, and we talked about the interesting part of risk is that's where the money's made. If you know your risk profile and know what you're good at, you have an opportunity to raise your profitability by understanding your risk tolerance and where you can do that. And what you're talking about, both of you, is a convergence of the technologies when you talk about, upfront building information modeling and VDC. You talk about reality capture mixed with computer vision and all of the ways that we can see the site, all the ways that we can now look at the documentation up front and the specs and the designs. We can start focusing on where we're really good at managing that risk and removing it. But then also, Nathan, to something you've always talked about, is we can change the experience, right? Because if we have the bots doing a lot of the checking, doing a lot of the paperwork that you're talking about, Hugh, and the documentation, or at least we're doing that in a better level, then we can focus on the experience. Right. The AI, if I tell it to generate something cool, which I heard from a person recently where a group of people had some money and they wanted to build something and they said, it has to be spectacular. The AI is not going to come up with that. Right. It might, but it would be interesting and probably not close to what the group of people in that room wanted.
Or constructible.
Or constructible, right? And that team gets to now focus on the process of bringing an experience to life, bringing a building, bringing a feature, bringing something to life, and, frankly, making more profit on it if you do it right. So I love the convergence of all this technology really opening us up for creativity. And to Nathan's point earlier, like, hey, here it is. And Hugh, can you imagine, when we're capable of handing it over and knowing the specs are covered, the clauses in the contracts are covered, people have got their butts covered, and everybody's ready to go? That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it will boil down to what kind of building you're talking about. So buildings that you do a lot of, I think will be faster because it'll be error checking and it'll have a lot to compare against. I think there's always going to be a need for judgment. Certainly for certain buildings that are unusual or, mission critical, whatever it might be. I want to go back, if you don't mind, to a point you just made about how, you can raise your prices based on a risk profile. And I think one of the things that we don't talk about as much as we might in construction is competitiveness, not at a how am I bidding, but how am I doing business level. And if you're able to use the technologies we're talking about, increase your ability to manage risk, but the market price for that amount of risk is set by the market, you're able to increase your profits. So, and there's no better way to compete than being more profitable than someone else, because you can invest in all the other things that make you competitive. So I think that there's an interesting perspective around, ability to really lock down risk and still charge what the market charges, or charge a little less, but not give away all your margin, which is another thing that contractors are kind of not so great at, is they compete away their own margins. But if we single innovation curve ourselves all the time. We come up with an innovation, we save money on a project, and then we bake it down into that price next. And that's a little bit of an odd experience, to be honest. Yeah. And it speaks to, being heavily project-based as opposed to producing the same product in direct competition with someone else all the time, like Pepsi, where I spent some time. You think in strategy much more when you've got the same army against another of the same army. And you know what I mean? Now that you drill down into how are we going to attack and how are we going to think. And when it's so project-based, it's harder for people to think strategically. That I think that's an area for growth. And forget about technology, just thinking about yourself in an industry where you're competing with a broader set of people because people aren't quite so regional as they were. I think you're going to see more and more of that. and hopefully more and more defensive of margin, but we'll see.
So at the end of the day, it goes back to transparency, I think, and all of this stuff, public versus private, because a lot of the examples when we talk about productizing and looking at this construction industry as something that we should be productizing, my argument is much more of let's think of construction more like Hollywood business of like how you come together to build, because projects are unique and they are bespoke, unless they're not. Again, there is more of a productized modular side of the industry, but I think a good chunk of what we do as trade people, as craftspeople, is more of a professional service. And so I think there is a balance of when we think about technology, comparing something maybe to productization and manufacturing in that side of the world. But there are other industries that don't look at all like construction, but actually act way more like construction than we realize when you start peeling away the layers of the onion.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's some structural things about every industry that makes it what it is. That, movies are tough because the competition it exists for sure. Not really at the director level, not at the GC, the equivalent of the GC level, I guess, not the production company. But below that, there's a ton of it. They're also really protected by a union, as we're seeing right now. They've both gone and gone on strike. And honestly, as someone who shot about 70 TV ads in my career, that is a union that deserves to exist, because otherwise you're getting an 18-year-old in the desert, up for 24 hours, dying of starvation. So there's a reason for it. But I think, your point I take is there's still room for us to analyze as an industry, what are we doing and what's repeatable, what's not? And you hear people talking about that more and more, I think. Where can we think about increasing margins? And or the other side of this is, how many people do you talk to who don't get enough sleep, who don't get to see their kids enough? All the lifestyle things that are easy to, poo-poo, but the reality is they matter. And they don't go away. It's not like, gosh, this was a tough week. It's like, my gosh, this was a tough decade. So I think some of the productivity, and it isn't, the other thing that's interesting is one of the things software generally helps you with is managing complexity. And that shows up when you don't have panics. Because the thing that really, I think, makes people's lives difficult is when you're solving you're fighting a fire. And the hope is that whether it's, more advanced things like large language models or just good software that's run well, that you smooth out some of the panics. And this maybe never is going to go away completely, but just that means that people's quality of life goes up, and our ability to attract the best and the brightest to the industry also goes up.
Yeah, you nailed it. We hear this a lot. It's not that we don't want to be problem solvers and we don't want to solve problems and we're not going to experience problems. We just don't want that to be that everyday state, right? That we're living in this, fight or flight constantly. It tears people up. It makes them work too much. It makes them worry about the future. It doesn't make them comfortable. It actually makes them really bad at decision making. That's why we make so many bad decisions and then go back on them after we've had a few minutes to breathe, because we've just been stuck there. So it's a great opportunity for us. And Hugh, you hit on it too. Like, between what you and Nathan said, there's this great ability. One of the problems with our industry is we travel around a lot, right? And that's really hard on people and hard on families and hard on units in general. So if we can commoditize or productize, Nathan, portions of the building and, I would say even regionalize that, and then still build unique, wonderful things on top of it, we've got an opportunity. And I think technology can help us get to the precipice of that. It's up to us, though. It's up to the humans, right? To push across that edge. It always will be. So that's the unique opportunities here. Hugh, what I want to know, especially watching, and you said this earlier, is like what we thought last year isn't even relevant. So what's not going to be relevant in 3 to 6 months? And, what sort of, as you shake your magic 8-ball, what's that future? What are some of those things that are going to happen?
The biggest one that I see right in front of us is these large language models are currently being treated as language-only interpreters or summarizers or whatever. They can be actors too. They can write code. They can create documents for you. They can probably do other things that I'm not thinking of right now. I think you're going to find that they're agents in a way that no other software has been. still need to tell them what to do, but you can tell them to do a sequence of things in a way that wasn't true before. People that have used large language models to code will tell you there's limits to it, but an API call is not the hardest thing to write, or a little website is not the hardest thing to write. So all of a sudden you can go up on ChatGPT right now and say, give me a bulleted list of all of, I don't know, of the Godfather movies. I don't know where that came from, but you know what I mean? Like it'll make a list for you right now. It'll make a table for you right now. And that's not asking it to, no one's engineered any software on top of that. So I think what you're going to find is, and hint, we're doing this, is how are you able to make this an agent that's still only doing what you're asking it to do, but it can do more than you having to feed it all the information. It can go find stuff for you. It can pull things in. I mean, there are OpenAI, before we even touch it, they've already got plugins that allow you to do a lot of this. So, and that's, we're just getting started. So I think the tools are being built that allow these kind of engines to do more and more. One of the things I like about AWS's approach to this is they didn't say, we're going to come with our own ChatGPT. They said, we're going to build a tool chain, which is kind of what AWS is, so that you can plug your thing in there. And then all of our data processing tools that we've got, which is, it's the best in the industry. All of that can plug into it. So you're starting with an infrastructure. And again, they did that in 4 months after the LLMs came out. I'm sure they were doing something and they kind of repurposed it. So I think you're going to find more and more tools to make these into agents that can do things that really increase their reach and their capabilities. I don't know what that'll mean. In that, I don't know what products some clever entrepreneur is going to create with that new capability. Just like we didn't know when the first time you saw AI that could recognize a dog, you didn't know there'd be an open space or a structured site in a couple of years. But it really didn't take that many years. If you think about, they all founded them around 2000, let's say 15. Well, image recognition like that came out in 2013, and maybe it was 2016. But the point is, within 3 or 4 years, you had some pretty awesome ideas. And I'm just thinking of one. There's been dozens like this. So I don't know what'll get done with it. But the fact that you have AI that can do some things that, again, are a little bit like a paralegal, but now the paralegal has the ability to get on the internet, which is, I think, going to be remarkably powerful.
But I think for that to make it out to the masses, again, because it's mostly tech folks that are tinkering with this, or at least someone that understands basic, like, how a logical, code works. And I think as it gets into the masses, we may not necessarily know how to ask the right questions. Like, is there some sort of like baseline education for those that don't live in this world for like how they can better utilize AI? Or do you think AI will just move so fast that it won't matter? Because I know we're always misinterpreting each other, right? And we're humans. So like how the heck is the AI supposed to know that? Or do we have to teach it some baseline way of, here's how you ask a good question?
Let's split that question in half. The first one is, right now you have to use prompts, and there are people making, I'm not kidding, $300,000 a year apparently being a prompt engineer. Which there's more to it than just asking the question the right way, apparently. I think that's a flash in the pan. I think they're going to get good at how questions get asked. In fact, some of the data they collect now is how questions get asked. So I think half of your question is it going to remain as obtuse as it is now? And I think no. I think they'll figure that out. So you'll be able to ask it questions. And also it'll say, I didn't understand that. Can you ask it again? Which chatbots have been doing for like 5 years. The other side, though, is, will they get better than humans are at understanding another human? I think that'll be domain specific. I think sometimes, yeah, and then sometimes no. Like if you ask a bad question, like nobody can answer it well. So you know what I mean? Or if you didn't articulate everything, or there's some assumptions and so on, what I think it might get better at is reading a little more of the context and remembering the conversation more perfectly than a human. So I think sometimes it might get better than a human. I think it's reasonable to expect they'll be as good as a human at answering general questions, and maybe better than a human at asking kind of specific, really like niche questions about a thing you're doing, right? Like about a job or something like that. We'll see. I think that we don't really know yet. And I think that, already Sam Altman is saying that this approach has maybe run out of gas. Like they're as good as they think they're going to get. We'll see. I think we'll see. But it's unlike the first time when AI came out, where nobody knew how to do AI except like 15 people. There are now thousands of people who understand the basics of machine learning and deep learning, which is why this time it exploded so quickly, is there's Literally, all of Silicon Valley does something with AI. So suddenly you have this infrastructure, and this is going to take it another level because you'll have more people in corporate America who see value and have invested in it. So when the next breakthrough comes, and it may have already happened, the transformer thing I mentioned, I think that was from a 2019 paper. So it took a while for that to turn into something we see. There may be a paper somewhere that we don't know about. I don't think so, but that in 3 years, we're going to be like, oh my gosh, it's another, then that'll be scary. Because if it's better than ChatGPT by a lot, that'll be creepy.
Yeah, it'd be a lot for it to be a lot more than that. But I mean, that's sort of kind of the norm we're getting used to here, that those kind of things happen. And I like we could do a whole nother episode on picking your cloud and how they approach, and the Amazon approach versus the Microsoft approach versus the, private cloud approaches to accessing this kind of information. I have some old friends in that world that, if they were listening in, they're jumping out of their seats right now going, we told you. Yeah. It's a fascinating time, man. And I really appreciate your take on it and what you're doing at Link on it. Where can people go kind of learn a little bit more, check out Link a little bit now that they're really interested?
Yeah. So just the link.ai is our website. I've got a big mouth, so I'm talking on LinkedIn all the time. So check me out there.
Yeah, follow Hugh on LinkedIn. And it's a great follow, actually, because, sometimes I agree with you, sometimes I argue with you, and that's kind of what I like.
That's right. That's what we're here for.
He does have you still got a couple of those podcasts rolling out there?
I do. The Constructed Futures is the big one. And we've got another one that's going to be a little more infrequent called The Submittal, which is pretty focused on construction documents and AI.
Cool. Well, check out Constructive Futures. I know a few of us have been on it. It's a great show. And Hugh, thank you so much for popping in and joining us today, talking a little bit about what you're up to, and I think really breaking down the large language model and AI world a little bit. Stay with us because we're going to get ourselves over into the news, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say because as we talked about pre-show, there's some interesting things.
Awesome.
Nathan, what do you got for us in the news today, buddy?
Oh, man, we're going to have some fun with electronic record keeping. So OSHA is, again, enforcing the rule that originally came out in 2016, got rolled back, and they're rolling out again in 2024. So if you have 100 or more employees, you are now required to submit your forms 300 and 301 electronically once per year. So we were just talking earlier, I have to imagine that the safety apps out there are just all over this as far as, saving the time, because they're mentioned this report, the amount of time and effort that it's going to take for certain industries to be able to report this kind of data, whether they do it at all or whether they do it manually. But I think what's more interesting about this is that the agency is planning on posting that data to a public website. Again, they'll strip out all the identifying information, the employee names, and the contact information. But there's still a lot of concerns here, and those that adversaries that are they're concerned that adversaries and parties wishing to mischaracterize an employer's safety record will have no trouble doing so with great specificity. And so I think it comes back to this whole dilemma of why we don't necessarily have data in the first place, because we're concerned about why we should share it in the first place. Hugh, I don't know if there is an answer to that. I think that's just always something we're always going to have to talk about and figure out where that line is and hopefully move that line a little bit.
What do you guys think the chances are that there's some litigation inbound? I have a feeling that some companies are going to say no and put an injunction or fight it. The point you made that you were kind of recounting is your safety data is not a perfect record of the world, right? So, and to your point, you can cherry pick, you can play around, you can spin things if you want. Undoubtedly, there will be some enemy of the construction industry who spins it and says, something. So yeah, I have a feeling that the first thing that'll happen is there'll be some legal fights against this from some of the big players who, they've got real money on the line. Like if they're painted as someone unsafe, you're going to have some developers and owners who are going to have an issue with them.
Not to mention insurance.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, right. I could see this dipping two ways too. They put it at 100 employees. Let's be honest, we've been in this business a long time. The heavy safety concerns are in the companies that are smaller than 100, right? 3 people, 4 people in a truck, 3 trucks for a company. Those folks are far less safe, far less informed. And this also, does it have an unintended effect where it's like, oh, well, cool, I'll keep my staff at 90 and I won't report. And then I could attack some of those people in my local market. And what is our intent? Are we saying that you have to do this for 100 or more because, well, we think it's too much of a burden on you if you're below 100? Well, that's kind of not I mean, there's plenty of software, plenty of tools out there that can make that possible. We just talked about a ton of things you can do. So really, should we even be letting those under 100 off? I don't know. And again, I'm with you. A lot of this has, this is where our industry, and I don't believe OSHA has this either, especially when it comes to the construction industry, has a standard organization that's not paid by anybody and not affiliated with anybody to manage the enterprise of data that we are creating. Mm-hmm. We honestly have to look at this as an opportunity ahead of us for, we have massive amounts of data, and that is massively powerful, as we've seen in the Genome Project, as we've seen in the ability to rapidly create and generate drugs, et cetera. Why aren't we doing that in construction? We have just as much, if not more, but we don't have anybody as a steward of that process. And so this brings a little bit of that up for me. Although if you're over 100 and you're not using a form or a program that does this, can you please call somebody and get that done? Like, I can list you off lots of people out there that can help you. It's crazy.
No, it is very interesting, and I think it's all about what gets measured gets managed, and the more that we make it transparent and make it available, again, regardless of how much we feel comfortable, it's what's going to lead to feeding those AI models and all the stuff that we're talking about when it's made public. So that is always the silver lining, is that there's going to be turmoil, but at the end, I think we all win.
I think, if I may, the one thing that also argues for is a chief data officer. The only one I know of is at I believe, Suffolk. There may be more. That's just the one I've heard of. But really someone who has got, C-suite or very high-level power, whose job it is to look after their data. At minimum, a CIO who's really got C-suite power is also important. And I don't know that we see enough of those. I think we're going to see more of it, but I think it's really important to get C-suite level technical oversight.
Yeah.
I'm going to tease a show for somebody somewhere to do on the opposite, where we could sit down and talk about that. Cause I was reading an article recently about the number of C-suite additions that technology is really driving. Mm-hmm. And I really only ever see a CIO, a CTO, sometimes a CISO, chief information security officer. You were starting to see, chief data officer. I heard one the other day, a chief intelligence officer that's really focused on AI and large language models and how those affect. Like, we could use a talk or a podcast where we could sit down and talk about, if you're running a large construction organization or even a medium construction organization, what kind of structure you need to have. So if you're interested in doing that, maybe we sit down at AGC IT Forum. If you guys are there, anybody's there, and I'll drop the microphone down and maybe we can spit some knowledge and see what happens. Cause I honestly, I think it's really difficult for them right now. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, if you're trying to run a business in construction, but we're telling you, hey, you need these 4, like, those aren't cheap. You said a programmer earlier, $250,000 a year. You had 4 of those. Well, that's a lot. That's a lot of construction to make up for that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. What else you got for us, Nathan?
So the other one, speaking of public information, so let's talk about pricing data. This one, again, another one from Construction Dive. Inflation cools, but material prices remain high. So ultimately what it's saying here, looking at some of the labor and statistics data, that overall construction costs are now 4.9% lower than they were a year ago. But again, input prices are still 38% higher than they were at the start of the pandemic. So prices are still higher, but the consistent flattening of costs means the worst of inflation is likely in the industry's rear view mirror. I think that what's really interesting here is just looking at some of these prices. Again, I'm about to be purchasing a bunch of materials, so I'm always curious where prices are going. It does look like over the years, things have dipped down back to close to where the pandemic pricing was, at least the trends in the pricing were. So really interesting to look at some of these data points and see how certain prices like concrete products and brick and clay over the last 12 months are still up. But other things like, certainly petroleum, but hot rolled steel bars down 10%, lumber, wood products down 10%. And so, yeah, it's the more we can incorporate these sorts of data into decision making, right? Because so much of this stuff with should you use prefabricated, should you use different material types, come down to, at the end of the day, cost. So the more data we have available to us, the better we can make those information decisions. So great to see the stuff being shared here, and hopefully that's stuff that Hugh, in the future we can plug into those databases and be able to see those in real time as we're making these sorts of decisions.
Yeah, I want to call out this one too to the ABC. ABC has been coming out with a lot lately on data and on this kind of guidance, and using Anirban Basu, which, if you don't know, he's the chief economist at ABC itself, but the American Builders, Associated Builders and Contractors, Matt Abels and the team over there is really doing a great job of analyzing data. The interesting thing for you, Nathan, is the price is coming down, right, and leveling out, but the cost of money is going up.
Mm-hmm.
So this really hasn't translated into cheaper construction. In fact, if you average it all out and do the math, construction's still going up.
Yep.
So that's a hard level for people to understand as we mix with inflation and as we mix the interest rates and as we do these kinds of things, and how it impacts outlook. And I think it drives a lot towards the nature of construction and the need in construction to be much more real time, to kind of what Hugh's doing, be focused on, is it meeting specs? Is it meeting costs? And what is the speed in which we can get it purchased, installed, and paid for? Because that actually significantly now impacts my overall cost of the money itself. So, I know I've been talking to small contractors across the country, and they're spending 30-40% of their day focused on their cash flow because it is so much more expensive than it was 2 years ago. It is. Hugh, I'm interested there.
I think what I would say is that some of that maintenance of the high level of cost, obviously during the pandemic, we had local supply chain issues all over the place, and we had global ones that were more about disruption. But I think the permanent thing is a decoupling from China. So, the number of things that were made in China that are now we're sourcing either in Mexico, in the US, or somewhere else, that you can't have a decoupling that big and not have it cost. So someone's going to pay for it. Ultimately, it's the consumer, whether that's the building owner, the contractor, whoever. So I think that I'll bet you it works itself out over time, but I don't think it'll go back to the level it was. There was an efficiency about global supply chains that was, the price of that was there was no resilience, right? They absolutely snapped. So no one's going to do that again. So to be more resilient, you have to pay for it. I think that's going to be some of why the prices are going to stay where they are.
That's a good take on it. I didn't even think about it from that side as well. So, well, great stuff. This news is fun today. I'm going to take us into my geek world, and let's see how you two do in my geek world. I have an article from Integi, INTEGY.co.uk. Is now the time to consider AVD, which is Azure Virtual Desktop. This has been a conversation that has been going around in the industry for a long time. It's let's be honest, it's how I made the mark in my career itself, was taking some of the legacy systems that we have here in our industry and putting them into the cloud, being using Azure, using virtual desktops, using published applications. And this is a really cool, the cost is going down, the accessibility is going down. And we're also I'm seeing at least, I would call it the consolidation of some of the old things you needed to do this. Things like Horizons, things like Citrix, other things are dying. But it's also really cool with the rise of home computing, the rise of working from home and remote work, but not being able to harness the power that you need. A lot of what we do in construction needs a lot of power, and Azure Virtual Desktop is actually starting to, in the underlying, be able to manage a lot of this and meet a lot of the needs that you have from a processing power perspective, from a display perspective and graphics perspective. So this is a huge opportunity. And I think to those same people that are under 100 that might be a little less safe, they're also a lot more nimble. And this is an opportunity to grow a business at scale, fast, without having to build and maybe add so much of that IT overhead that we used to have, and make that more operational overhead and operationalize technology in a way that really meets us where we are. How many times are we setting up trailers and using expertise to do those kinds of things when could be a lot easier and almost anybody can plug it in? I mean, how many people get Xfinity at home now and pull up your app and they provision your wireless? You guys know you used to pay me to come to your house to do that like 15 years ago. So it's come a long ways. So I just wanted to bring up Azure Virtual Desktop and its increase in experience and its use cases. There's lots of different things that are out there. I'm sure some people driving around the road in the BIM and VDC world are trying to throw things at me, but that's the way it goes. Hugh, I'm interested. You come from the cloud world. So what's your thoughts on virtual desktops in general, and maybe what Azure's doing?
Nowhere near as sophisticated about this as you are, but I think that to the degree you're providing the same level of functions and protection and connectivity out in someone's kind of house that they might have at home or might have at the office, I think is fantastic. I think it allows you to kind of take the idea of an iPaaS where things are kind of all on one bus to another level. And again, I think your point about smaller companies that maybe don't have quite the same level of infrastructure, that the cloud companies like Azure are abstracting that away. They're making it so that, you still need someone to look after it, but it does a lot for you. I think it's great. I hope it leads to more functions and more capability wherever people are, whether it's at home or it's on a job site or it's on the road. I think that there's just a lot of opportunity, especially because Wi-Fi is less of a real variable than it was. I mean, it's always a variable when you don't want it to be, but it's a lot less of one than it used to be. Like you can go to a Starbucks and get real things done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with the 5G on your phone now too, we're bridging that gap. I mean,
That's right.
I was on a CPC with Nathan and I went and tested some Wi-Fi in a place, and then the Wi-Fi died on me because a whole bunch of other people showed up.
Yeah, that's right.
Switched my phone. It worked. So Nathan, what are your thoughts, man?
But I think even just, these time sensitive approval chain type activities that, have to be on this sensitive, behind a firewall sort of thing, but to be able to have accessibility from anywhere. I mean, that's huge how many things have gotten delayed because you're waiting on one person sign off because they went on vacation or whatever and they couldn't, get into the system to be able to click that button. So I think the more we can get rid of that barrier or that roadblock is certainly going to help us move faster in the industry.
Yeah, future of technology is increased accessibility with increased security at the same time. That's a pretty fabulous model and a lot easier for procurement and other areas of IT. So check it out. I'm on to my last one, and an homage to my own CEO, Andrew Zukoski at Join. This was fun. I saw this and I thought of him, and I thought, let's have this discussion. Offsite construction. Why we don't build cars in your driveway. Now, this is an analogy that has been floating around for a very long time. When we compare building a car and ordering it part by part and putting it together in your driveway versus you go and you buy a car, why do we not do that with construction? Now, a lot can be learned from what manufacturing has done and standardization. And should we be building more and more offsite? Yes. I will argue we are never going to build a building like that, right? We're not going to produce them out of a factory. That has been attempted. We've realized that you can't build them as big as we need them to be, nor as safely. There's cool new ways to achieve that and cool new innovations to achieve it. But Nathan, I have to be honest, you guys have to check this out. This was a LinkedIn post, and it's from Dave Verna, Director of Construction Technology at AT Chadwick Company. Just the pictures in general that this guy found are awesome.
I was going to say, I was wondering how many he made himself versus found online, because a lot of them look like they were homegrown, and that took a lot of effort, or really good at Photoshop. I don't know, one or the other. Yeah,
or really good at asking an AI to do it for you.
That's true. That's true. What is it? Blue Dahlia, or what's it called that does that?
Yeah, there's like Blue Dahlia, I think it is, that does that for you now.
Yeah, that's wild. That is cool.
Well, I know you're a big proponent, Nathan, of offsite construction, and you've heard this analogy a lot. What are some of the things about it that you think are are for real and what are some of the realities that aren't real?
Well, I mean, it goes back to my argument away from thinking about construction as manufacturing. Because again, how many of those same cars with, interchanging kit apart features are you going to have? Now, again, there are parts of the industry in multifamily and other things where you could start to replicate that sort of stuff, and offsite does make a lot more sense. But as I'm learning, doing a one-off, custom home build, we're trying to do as much panelized as we can, but it's most likely going to be on-site panelized. And it's ultimately comes down to what do you care about, and ours is all about compressing the time that our existing living space is exposed to weather, and so how we do that will be a creative process. But I think it's every project is its own adventure, and we shouldn't necessarily think about it like cars, but I think we can learn a lot from the automotive industry to smooth things along.
Hugh, what's your thoughts on it, man?
Two of them. One, I totally agree with Nathan's point that it'll depend on the building. Some buildings and some parts of buildings, it makes better sense. But also, Jeff, you brought up an important point. The way things are built and fabricated has a huge impact on how well they perform. And we don't really know how to do certain things, like somebody was talking about 3D printed concrete. Is it able to be anything like as strong as the concrete we use and elsewhere? And I think the answer is no, not right now. So having load-bearing concrete built that way right now, I think is a question. The other thing that's interesting, though, is we talk about robots now, and there are some like Dusty that make a ton of sense because the thing they're doing isn't so different in terms of prep and so on. But what about fabrication on a job site that is done by a robot, where you have precision, you can do things with pressure, you can do some other things? I don't know that that's coming immediately, but I have a feeling that in 10 years, we're going to see things going on in the building of a building that don't exist anywhere else, that are maybe an application of something over there that we tweaked a little and now it makes sense and it adds a lot of safety or a lot of speed or a lot of performance. I have a feeling we'll see some of that. In the short run, though, you just can't get around the fact that the ground is different, the wind is different, the vision of the architect is different, the speed is different, that we've compressed the schedule. The number of variables that are involved is so high that it's not like, well, yeah, but we do this, we hammer the same way every time. Yes, you do. You know what I mean? So I think trying to reduce it to repeatable activities, that's not a bad analytic exercise, but I don't think it builds a building yet. So I think there's still a lot of figuring out to do.
But you can draw that line. Yeah, you can draw that line, though, where yes, every foundation may be different, but once the foundation gets to a certain point, it's sort of like it's this handoff point where, okay, now we go, right? And I think, because you can't think about doing everything. What are the things that are going to be different? Handle that. But then what are the things that can be the same? It's a thought exercise that you have to go through. And there's a lot of holes to poke through it, but there's a lot of opportunities that I think we're still yet to seize.
Yeah. And if you start to walk, and I've had a chance to walk a lot of fabrication shops, you can see, Hugh, the beginning of where in a manufacturing facility, you would have, a robot doing welds of some sort or bends or forming certain steel or et cetera, hangers, other things like that, assembling things that are repeatable, that are deliverable, that make it faster, higher quality. You can use your people to be doing other things. Yeah, I think a lot of that is coming. So there's this mixed mode where we're not going to deliver a car, a building that way, but we're going to deliver parts and pieces of it and assemble that like you would a car. It's just a skilled set of folks that are still going to have to assemble it. It's not like shipping it to a dealer and any Joe Schmo can get in and drive it. I don't think we're ever going to get there. Do
you think some of that also is value add, right? So you just mentioned, you've implied the broader MEP kind of group of activities, but that's so value add that it makes sense that you're seeing more automation and more technology. Pouring concrete, it's a little harder to say that is so value add, per unit of work that you're going to apply quite the same. And it's huge, like per volume, the value add in terms of money is lower. So I wonder if that might drive some of the areas and pace of innovation is how much money are we really saving?
Yeah. And some of that will come as it's less about the money and more about the people and the bodies and et cetera that you need. So yeah. I mean, a lot out there. That article was awesome. Take a look at it. I'm excited. Hugh, I'm super excited for this episode. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, man. I appreciate you sitting down and hanging out through the news. And as always, providing lots of interesting feedback. I love it.
Thanks so much. This was a lot of fun, as always.
It was Nathan Wood. Thanks for joining me, man. You jumped on this one. You were excited.
I had to take a break in the hot sun from all that demo work, but I got to grab the crowbar and head back out there.
Yeah, for those of you that want, Nathan's out there, CPC, living the dream or the suffer, which one you want to call it. Depends on what that weather's like today down there, buddy.
From shared pains to shared gains, hopefully.
Well, someday I've virtually walked through it. I can't wait to actually walk through it. So good luck. Thank you for tuning in today to geek out for our interview with Hugh Seaton. To read all our news stories, learn more about our guests, and to listen to the show, visit thecontechcrew.com. This is the ConTech Crew signing out. Until next time, enjoy the ride and geek out.